soon. What's unusual about today is it's part two of a two-part interview with my guest, who really has had an extraordinary career spanning 6 decades. I suppose from humble beginnings to working for major corporations in Africa. His unique sort of style meant that he even met his wife at a ceilidh in Malawi. My goodness me. I'm delighted to welcome back for the second part of this interview, Michael Armitage to you in your business studio. Hiya, Michael.
Hi, Alec. Thanks for inviting me back.
Yes, my goodness, you're getting 2 shows out of this. Fantastic, but it's a fascinating story. And I suppose for anybody who's just listening, I hope you get up to listen to the part 1 before you get to this. But if not, it'll all make sense as we continue on the journey that Michael has. He's now in South Africa. He's been training people, and the Swiss have arrived along. So tell us, pick up the story from the Swiss arriving.
The Swiss arrived, and they then took over the training of all the accountants. So that side of things dropped, but I still had a training function, because part of my job in Lesotho was I had to train up a successor, and the successor had to be a local Basotho. I was then sort of like the last expatriate in the room, switching off the light. The locals could then take over. And so after 3.5 years of being there, I did train up a local who was then suitable enough, understood enough, and was able and capable enough then to take over the handling of looking after the accounting function on a financial manager basis for 13 subsidiaries.
Fantastic.
So then I suddenly found myself with no job. And I said, well, what now? And luckily Deloitte had heard about me. And Deloitte said, Mike, we have a similar situation here in Malawi. We have a development corporation. It's got subsidiaries. They're not doing too brightly. They need somebody to go in there. And the government have tasked us with providing them with somebody on loan to government for a period to help sort out the issues there. Would I be interested?
Right.
And I said, yeah, that sounds fine. Malawi, yeah, let me have a look at it. So learned a bit about the history of Malawi going there. The position was considered that important. I went into the country with no work permits.
Okay.
The secretary of the political party actually issued a letter saying it's okay, let him in without any documentation. So here I was, the great undocumented, going into Malawi.
Fantastic.
And so I went there, but pretty soon, unfortunately, politics and other things got in the way. I was 3 months into like a 1-year assignment at the government organization when the chief executive of the organization said the wrong thing.
Oh.
He said, I perhaps am going to be president of the country. And when you have a life president in there, very strict, what happens is the man suddenly found himself banished back to the village in sackcloth and ashes. Even degrees from Harvard, he was highly qualified and exceptional for the position, thrown out. So his successor comes in, and his successor doesn't like Deloitte, he prefers Pricewaterhouse. So suddenly the exercise with Deloitte gets chopped, and Pricewaterhouse get given the gig to do. So, you've got to learn with some of these things is that things happen suddenly outside of your control. You think this is going along swimming, I'm going to be here a year, doing this exercise, next thing, chop, gone.
And it's amazing the power of politics and friends and bringing those into influential places.
Yes. And so, but then Deloitte then got in hot water with the government. Government said to them, look, we've spent $250,000 here on a computer system that you've put into this company that looks after all the government assets. All the government assets were owned by one company. So all the ministers' Mercedes, the tanker trucks, the water trucks, even down to wheelbarrows, and various, were all owned by the one company, who then rented them out to the different government departments. So they had control over what happened to them. They were particularly interested in the Mercedes because everybody used to use them as taxis. So the driver used to drive the Mercedes to as a function, and while he was at the function, he used to whiz around the village and doing things and take people for cash. And so the Mercedes were getting a lot of mileage on them when they shouldn't have. And so government turned around to Deloitte and said, we've spent $250,000 on this, but it's not working. They're not producing the accounts. We're getting accounts about 10 months after the month end. And they've got an overdraft and it's climbing. We don't know what's happening. We're making some decisions. Sounds familiar?
Yes.
Decisions, but they're based on historic information, so they're going wrong. You need to fix it. You've got 16 people in your office, Mr. Deloitte. If you don't fix this, there's 16 work permits that get cancelled. So no pressure. So they said, Mike, go in. I knew nothing about computers, never been near a computer before. And here I am suddenly parachuted into this government organization that has this fancy $250,000 computer system that's going wrong. But luckily, I'm able to think logically, have a look at what the output is and say, if that's the output, then what must the input have been? And what's the input in the middle? If I put A in, I get C out, then B must have happened in the computer. And I was able to think about what was happening. And so I found and fixed a few bugs on the system to make it work a lot better. I then worked with the staff, and I then trained up the staff and got them then to used to how to do things a bit better. So within a short period of time, they were then getting accounts out on time. And I then had a look at the decisions and got them to make the correct decisions, such that I was there 18 months doing all this. At the end of the 18 months, their overdrafted stopped climbing, was starting to come down. And 6 months later, they actually had cash in the bank.
Wow.
One thing about that is I loved doing that. I loved solving the problems. I loved sort of resolving issues, finding challenges, overcoming things and finding ways of doing it.
Right.
So that when I did leave Deloitte at the end of my contract, one of the people in Malawi who I'd met, I was in Round Table, a young men's service organisation. Mm-hmm. I'd met there. He said, look, we have issues. We've got the same computer system as government. Our stocks are getting qualified every year by the auditors, and we don't know how to resolve the issue.
Okay.
So I went there and had a look at their systems, saw things. Again, couple of changes, sorted it all out for them.
And that's a fascinating piece of learning there. As you said, information in, information out, and what's happening in between, people don't understand it.
Yes. And I was lucky that I was able to work out what is the system doing to it. If that is the end product, what has the system done to it? Mm-hmm. So I'm lucky that I'm able to think that through and work out all the steps on it.
A forensic look.
Yes, because I have done forensic auditing as well. But so yes, I was then looking forensically at things, as you say. And my contract came to an end with Deloitte. So I went to the client, sorting out the stock. And then, unfortunately, a few personal issues happened. And I went back to England for a while. And then I met Fiona again, as you say, while I was in Malawi. Fiona was out on holiday for 2 weeks. Her uncle was head of customs and excise, and she was staying with him. And I went to an Irish ceilidh, and with one of the lads, John, who was single, and he was two nice young ladies sitting next to us on the table dancing. So I said, John, come on, dance with the ladies. So he went across and danced with the ladies. And Fiona never lets me forget, I actually danced with Jane first. But yes, so we met up there. But then at the end of my contract with in Malawi, I then called round to see Fiona in London and said, how about dinner? And so we went from there, and now we've been married 30 odd years.
Right. And this was to take you on another journey, though.
Yes. But then Fiona was working for South African Airways, and she said she wanted to go and live in South Africa. And I said, well, I've got all the qualifications to be there. I've got the work permits. I've got residential permits to go and work there. So me being me, I jumped on an aircraft, went down to South Africa unemployed, and said, I can get something. In 2 days, I got an interview for a job with a Hanson Trust organisation, one of their subsidiaries, who were having problems. And that's what I loved. Was that they mentioned the word, we have problems, we have issues, we've got challenges, and that immediately said, yes, that's for me. Let me dig in, let me go there. If they'd said to me, we want you as a finance manager. You're going to be doing bank reconciliations every month end, reconciling creditors every month end. I would steer away from it, because my experience then would be 1 month times 36. It'd be the same thing again, repeated month after month. Whereas if I go to challenges and that, now my experience is 36 different experiences.
Exactly.
All the time. So I went to the organisation there where Lord Hanson was in, and you pick up a lot of things about business with how things are directed and worked. And he insisted on some of the things, same auditors, same insurance companies, same everything worldwide.
Okay.
When I joined the company, it was worth 13 billion. And he believed in cash. He actually had 8 billion in cash.
Wow.
So he could go out and buy. He bought Imperial Tobacco. He wrote a check for 1 billion. Have a check. Here's 1 billion. Bang. Right. But he was a people stripper. In those days, you had two types of people who took over companies. There was the people strippers. There was asset strippers. Asset strippers went in and just denuded the company and took all the assets out to make a profit on the assets that sold. Lord Hanson said, no, I want to then make a profit on the assets I keep.
Right.
And so he went in and he stripped people out.
Yeah, he was looking for it to be driven more efficiently.
Yeah, there's no necessity for having all these layers of management. When he did buy Imperial Tobacco, there was 100 people in a head office building. The day after he bought it, there was one person in head office. And he sold the building. But he said there's no requirement for it. I reported to what was 1/3 of Hanson Trust. I've just told you what it was worth, 13 billion. And they produced 126 million a year profit in the group that I was in. And my reporting structure was to England, to an office that had a bookkeeper, a secretary, a number cruncher, and a chief executive. That was 1/3 of the organization. Nothing else in between. No area directors, chairman, you name it, whatever else. Nothing in between.
Wow.
And that then, sort of you learn from that the efficiency you can have within organizations by removing some of these superfluous bits between. And the other thing he said was that a fixed asset, I learned, was a fixed asset is a fixed asset no matter what you do with it. Because when he started the business, you buy a Mini for £500. And he said, no bugger in my organisation. It was from Yorkshire, by the way. He said, no bugger in my organisation is going to buy a bloody Mini without me saying so. So he had a capital expenditure limit of £500 sterling. The other thing he didn't believe in was inflation.
Right, okay.
Still £500 sterling 20 years later in the organisation. It had to have his personal signature on it.
Okay.
It's a fixed asset, whether you hire it, steal it, rent it, buy it, whatever you happen to do it, it's an asset. And it's got to have a 3-year payback. And what does that do to an organisation? That gives you a 33% return on your assets.
Yeah. And it's all very simple.
So, so it's a very simple thing to get people to giving him a return on the assets that he had in the business. And I learned from that some of those simple things, about what business is all about. Because we did turn the organisation around. When I went to the organisation in South Africa, they were $1 million overdrawn. They weren't making that much money. They had no costing system in place. So I put costing systems in. I helped them turn around the organisation, and we paid them a dividend of $1 million more than the purchase price of the company back to England within a couple of years.
Wow. And how had that gone so badly wrong based on his sort of philosophy of business?
What had happened is they'd taken the eye off the ball because it was a very small constituent part. You've got a £13 billion organisation. You're not really going to be looking at something that's worth, sort of 2 or 3 million.
Right.
So what had happened is that they hadn't really given it much thought. It was an afterthought anyway, as well, is because when he bought Ever-Ready batteries, which he wanted to buy, this company happened to come along as a subsidiary.
Right.
But it wasn't chopped immediately because he had a person who went around the world chopping companies that A, didn't speak English, and B, didn't want. He had a very profitable company called Big Dutchman, chicken farming business, but he got rid of it because Dutch speaking, didn't speak English.
Right.
He sold the business off, didn't speak English. He said, they've got to understand what we're saying. I want English as the first language.
Okay, makes sense, makes sense. So how long did you spend there and what was to happen next?
Yeah, I was there 3.5 years. I said, and we turned the business round. We did put a management buyout proposal in to Lord Hanson, and he's a bit short there. I want 23 times earnings.
Right.
So I said, well, I've turned the organisation around. What's going to happen now? I'm going to revert back to being that boring finance manager of doing the same thing every month for so many years. So I said, let me find a challenge. I said, well, I enjoy problems. I enjoy challenges. Let me go out there as what in those days was called a management consultant. So I started my business and people said, you're mad. This is November. We're coming up to the Christmas shutdowns. No one's going to be doing anything.
All right.
But lo and behold, Komatsu, the earth-moving people, were having problems with their budgeting, and they needed somebody to help them sort out with their budgeting. So Komatsu then said, can you come in for a couple of months to do some budgeting exercise for us? Well, I stayed there about 5 months, because I did budgeting and I did other things for them as well to help them improve.
Right.
And you then realize as well, when you've done that you've got to keep contact with people. Because Komatsu then gave me 2 other exercises over the next 10 years.
Right.
Because you maintain contact with people, networking, it's called networking. So I kept in contact with them and you help people. The finance director couldn't find work. He wanted to leave Komatsu and couldn't find another job. I said, let me look at your CV. He showed me his CV and I said, well, let me make a couple of small changes to it. Me being me, I focus on positives. So I changed it around a bit and put a few more positives in there. And within a couple of weeks, it got another job as a finance director with another public company. Then what happened? A month later, Mike, we have some problems here. Can you come in and sort them?
Right, great. The power of networking.
It is. So that's what it is, sort of helping people, and because I believe in, sort of what goes around comes around, sort of you call these people, eventually they'll help you. Yeah. It's the way you treat them as well. They will then treat you similarly back.
Exactly. Exactly.
So here I was now at Komatsu, that came to an end. And I said, well, what else is there out there? And one of the very large mining companies was looking for non-executive directors. I said, well, that looks interesting because, what do I know about non-executive directors? Let me go for it. And lo and behold, they took me on. So suddenly here I was a full-time non-executive director for 5 public companies, looking at their strategy, looking how they work, because that gave me a great insight then more into the strategic end of things, of how strategy is important, about what that end goal is, and sort of how you're going to get there. And so I had a look at that, and I also did a few things in there as well. As when I saw problems, I fixed them. Yeah. Sometimes you do it and you're not meant to fix them. Unfortunately, I didn't know the hidden agendas of some directors. Fixing. Yeah. But that happens. But me being me, I fix things. If I see something, I fix it, I improve it, I do something, and I assume I've got the authority to do it.
So politics is not one of your key points?
No, me and internal politics is not one of my strong points, which is why I'm glad I've been on my own for 33 years now without having to get involved in internal politics.
You'll always come across it though, even when you're working as a consultant.
But the only time I did come across it was when I did an exercise for a mail order company. And they wanted help with their sort of cash receiving end of things. And so I came up with a plan of how to use a franking machine for this and do it. You know, I came up with different solutions, unusual solutions, how to use equipment differently within it. And the director said, "That's great, thanks." Anyway, I went back a couple of weeks later to go and pick up my check. And I said, "How's things going?" He said, "Great." I said, "But I kind of noticed my reports in your bin." He said, "Yeah." He said, "That was great." He said, "I used that against the other guy here. So now I'm the managing director." You know, so sometimes people use things for different purposes to which you expect.
Yeah. Once you understand that.
And in his instance, you know, it got him the MD job. So
fascinating. Just shows you how people use things to suit their own purpose.
Yes, they do. And sometimes you've got to try and keep that in the back of your mind as well. You know, because that then part of that understanding and, you know, the learning about the business is, what is it going to do? What are other people going to do with it? How's it going to be disseminated? You know, so you've got to learn then how to put out things to different people. You know, and you've got to use that layered effect in business of the guy at the top knows 100%, but the guy down below knows 10%.
Yeah.
And you've got to keep it that way.
Yeah. So you're on your way to Ireland at some stage, and
yes, yeah. What then happened was I ended my non-executive directorship because I realised internal politics and all the other things weren't for me. So I went back to being a consultant again. One of the guys, whilst doing the non-executive director thing, he was then working for Anglo-American,
right,
just company in Southern Africa. And he said, "I've got some issues here." So I went along and helped them out. And, you know, I then did my trade-off bit as well, because
right,
the bookkeeper. Now, what's a 15 years qualified accountant doing going down as a bookkeeper? But I said to myself, there's a trade-off here. Anglo-American is the largest organization in Southern Africa. There must be something in there for me at my higher level.
right.
So let me get in at a low level, get noticed, and then get my other work. And I did get noticed, because they put me into the aircraft section, the aircraft leasing section, where I also realized that you've got to get the right person for the right job. It put somebody in who was a cost accountant in a gold mine and put him in as the finance manager of an aircraft leasing section.
Right.
And they'd wondered why the figures were all butchered and they didn't look anything like a set of figures should look like. I knew nothing about aircraft leasing, but I picked it up very quickly. I'm able to do that and sorted all the things out. But I realized that they were taking like 3 days to do entries that should have been done in 3 hours.
Right.
Now, you need to change your system. And this is then when internal politics comes in, because the general manager said, but that existing system had been recommended to us by a main board director. I can't. Anyway, luckily, Jim flew off to Russia with the Oppenheimers to chat about gold and diamonds. And when he came back, I said, "Jim, the bookkeeping's now done in 3 hours, not 3 days." He said, "That's great. How have you done it?" I said, "I threw that system out and bought a different one."
Good.
When he picked himself up off the floor, he then said, "What's going to happen now?" I said, "Don't worry. I will explain it to the main board," because I already was reporting to the main board anyway, as part of the head of the leasing. So I explained everything to the main board and they said, "That's fine, but we've got to put it through the committees." It took them 5 months to say yes to the computer system, because you had to go through the computer committee, the finance committee, some other committee to be a committee. And then that makes you realize then how inefficient some of these businesses are.
And it's sort of testament to Lord Hanson and his strategy of setting up organizations.
Yes, and it made me think of Lord Hanson and say, cut the crap, cut the people out, stop all these things. You know, there's no necessity to go through all this whole rigmarole.
Well, we've 2 minutes left, Michael. Can you believe that after 2 weeks?
Yeah, but then I became ill, and we decided that we needed different weather, because the South African weather being extremes from sort of 12 degrees air conditioned, 30 degrees outside, I then collapsed. So my wife being Irish, we then came over to Ireland and we realized the weather here was great for us. So I came here for the weather. So the weather was nice, flat, straight, and, you know, I wasn't collapsing anymore.
Fantastic, fantastic. So you've been in business here in Ireland for how long now?
20 years.
Wow, 20 years. And if people want to find out more about you, where can they do that?
Well, my business is called Business Action Advisors. I've got a website, businessactionadvisors.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I don't keep up with them. I'm not electronic organized.
Right, okay.
Part of my condition is that I emanate magnetism, not personality magnetism, but physical magnetism. And I freeze computers and freeze electronic devices. When our house burnt down,
right, okay.
10 days after we bought it, we went along to buy all new clothes for the kids at Dunnes Stores, and the last bit of stuff being bought in 3 trolley loads, the lady just couldn't lift it over the counter, so I went to lift it over the counter and I froze her till machine. So she had to start again. My wife banished me out of the shop, and I had to start again doing it.
So I suppose if we're looking for somebody who really is looking to be a problem solver, a forensic accountant, and is prepared to roll up his sleeves, Michael Armitage is the man, but don't let him either A, do something boring, or near electronics that might get damaged.
Yes, that's about it.
Well, I tell you, that brings us to the end of a fascinating 2-part interview with our guest today, Michael Armitage. Fantastic. Wow, what can I say? Thank you, Michael, for those inspirational stories.